In any case, I'm going to keep it short, which in our COVID Zoom moment seems the only way to go. That is to say, I watched a YouTube video of Tom reading at Trinity College, I believe in Ireland. And he says there, before he starts reading, there are introductions, and then there are introductions. And thank you for that kind of introduction. Well, you're not getting that kind of introduction here. Okay. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. But if you do want that kind of extended commentary on my part on Tom and his work, then check out my LCLC podcast. The most recent one is a 30-minute interview with Tom. And on the other side of the conference, I'll put up part 2. This afternoon, all I want to do is say that Tom and I have always shared a bond over a commitment to the hard work of writing and respect for what it is writers do. By praising Tom for his technical mastery, I mean, that's a bit like praising Daniel Day-Lewis because you think he's got really good acting chops. After all, Tom has been singled out for his craftsmanship ever since his first book, After One, came out in 1983. The question for Tom, it seems to me, has always been how to best use those gifts he has as a writer. In other words, it's always been a question of subject matter. And here is where we arrive at the great scandal of Tom Sleigh's work. And by scandal, I mean to use that word in the best way, I think. Fortune gave him, while he was in his 20s, the terrible hook of a blood disorder. And that nightmare state drove him to complete his great long poem ending, and indeed all of his second book, Waking. But then something unexpected happened, and Tom lived. Sadly, he's even told me he's outlived the doctors who were overseeing his care. The reprieve has forced Tom to confront the question, not just of how to remake a style, but of how to find a theme, a new theme that would be his theme. Given his technical skills, Tom could have settled into writing poems about language itself, about abstract painting in words, let's call it. He could have continued to mine his own conditioned memoir style, and every once in a while he does a little of both. But Tom was willing to risk more and revive the rich tradition in poetry and American literature, specifically that we can call after Carolyn Forche, the poetry of witness. A tradition that is anchored so movingly in the work of Walt Whitman when he gave us his great collection of poems, Drum Taps. The result in Tom's case has been a provocation for those of us who continue to value literature. Many will remain indifferent to this provocation. Some will dismiss it as disaster porn or catastrophe tourism, but I don't. And I believe a growing number of people will see that Tom's recent poems, the ones that come out of his experiences in Africa and the Mideast, are like cold water splashed on the face. They force us to rethink the value of art, of what endures and why. At its best, Tom's poetry has remained a constant in my life, a strange animal that roams around in my head, demanding that I follow it as it urges me in its own language to risk more and to act in ways that force me out of my comfort zone and that rouse in me a new way to try to go about living and to do what I can to help. So Tom, I congratulate you this afternoon on the publication of The King's Touch, your 11th collection. And my friend, the podium is now yours.
Well, Matthew, that was a lovely introduction. And I actually think the guy at Trinity College would envy it. So, like Matthew said, I've spent great deal of time sort of meditating on what you might call um, extreme states, none of which, of course, I sought out, but seems to have found me. Um, and one of the great things about, knowing Matthew over all these years is just the different incarnations that I know he's gone through and that I've certainly gone through. And the the whole enterprise of writing poems, going to places in the Middle East and in East Africa, for me was profoundly well, it's disturbing. It was incredibly interesting. It's been I met some just amazing people who I would never have met any other way. And for that alone, it's been really worth it. In any case, I will read. And but before I do, I want to thank Brandon for his technical wizardry, because after all, if you don't have Brandon there, then nothing happens. And I also want to thank Matthew for putting this together. Deeply appreciate it. I got to listen to Sarah Band's panel today, and got to hear Eric LeMay and Jericho Parham's Amy Wright talk about issues in nonfiction, and found it all, kind of galvanizing in lots of interesting ways. So I am now going to read about, like Matthew said, around 25 minutes, and I really will read that long because I have a timer here which will stop. The first poem I'm going to read is, like I said, some of these poems will be coming out of the experiences I've had, doing the kind of journalism that I've been doing, which are basically long form essays about refugee situations. And the very first poem is about, well, it sort of took off from the fact that I was actually had been in Syria before Syria fell apart. And there was the dictator, who still is the dictator, was having an election, which was rather hilarious. And then the next day, the election vote came out, and wonder of wonders, he got 98% of the vote. And I kept wondering, well, what about the other 2%? In any case, when he was, doing an outdoor press conference, there was a fly, buzzing around his head, and not exactly creating havoc, but they could manipulate the vote, but they couldn't manipulate the fly. And I thought, I'd like to be that fly. And so I wrote a poem in the voice of a fly. And here's the poem. Whatever His Excellency may say about the situation, the long-term outlook, I'm only a fly buzzing around his head, concerned with breeding, feeding, my outlook decidedly short-term. It's so hard to be cornered forever in a human form. Now I see everything from 100 different angles in 1,000 different lenses. Other signs to parse. Power is His Excellency's insignia. I can hear it breathing his lungs in and out, as if he were being kept alive on a ventilator. That's how you know when whatever is 100% in a person takes over every thought, every moment. Power is never less than 100%. How do you escape it? How do you keep from being stalled forever? Each filament inside you glowing like a heater in a room that gets just so warm and no warmer. You have to grow wings. You have to accept that roadkill is your meat. You have to risk being crushed by a flailing hand. But once you do, you can train each of your lenses on the tiny worlds taking place in each of your eyes. Worlds where the excellencies are just another flaw in the rock crystal, dissolving under the force of the giant waterfall, the Iguazu Falls, that only a fly can cross, born through mist by mist. So, you got to fly, equal time goes to a spider. And I remember being at my desk one day and looking at my screen, and there was a kind of weird little shadow at one corner of it. And I looked more closely and I discovered that it was a little spider weaving a web. So this poem is called "In Which a Spider Weaves a Web on My Computer Screen." And it kind of takes a hard right turn in the second part. It's in two parts. One thing that maybe is I don't know if it's common knowledge, but many Palestinians, when they were expelled in 1948, kept the deeds to their houses. In which a spider weaves a web on my computer screen. 1. What is that shadow that weaves itself so fine across the edge of my computer screen? There it is, a pinprick of a spider weaving a web I'm looking through, as if it were a veil of second sight that, as I type these words behind the veil, the screen light shines right through. It weaves the sun into its web and turns the screen into a mirror, shooting back my own eyes, looking at the spider and wondering what the spider knows of me. Hello, pal, I want to say, but that feels unctuous, overly familiar for what I know I'm going to do. The web sways and ripples each time I breathe, getting ready to rip it away. There's a lot of casual brutality to reconcile. The spider clings to its web's outer rim, plucks with a slender leg a near invisible guy wire each time I type a word and the silk trembles. 2. He said that being a refugee was like living like a spider in the bottom of a well. He held this quiet dignity close to him. The others in the room stopped talking. I won't repeat exactly what he said, since it's his to tell. But it had to do with how his mother died, how his home was destroyed. The words you use to talk about such things, the second they're uttered, sound suspect. For him to say, the soldiers shot my father, they blew up our house, and the worst thing I ever saw, the very worst, was seeing my baby brother crying on my dead mother's breast, is only my rendering in English what the translator, speaking in French, said he said. Raveled in words, as a spider is raveled in its silk, I think I should know what to want to say. But to want to say is not what the man, in his use of a figure of a spider drifting, suspended, tethered to a lifeline spinning out, impossibly fine, intends when he says, "The deeds to my house are stained with blood," and then shows you the stains, 3 long stains, dried brown and fading above the signature line. This next poem is Youth. And the situation in the poem is that it draws on experiences I've had, but the speaker is a journalist who's supposed to be writing an article about how soldiers deal with the stress of battle and a fear of death. But the journalist can't wrap his head around the subject because every time he starts to approach the subject, he gets distracted by these 2 little boys who are playing in the yard of the military compound where he's staying. And every day about 4:30 or 5, a mortar barrage comes in, and the little boys are so used to it, they just keep right on playing. Youth. Smelling of sweet rosin, the Aleppo pines' shadows grow taller by the hour. 2 identical twin boys chase each other through the shadows. The one who's 10 minutes older yelling, "I'm gonna kill you," while the younger one laughs, kill me if you can." Day by day, these tea time mortars keep pecking at the blast wall, but the boys have grown so used to it, they keep on playing. If they weren't here in front of me, I'd find them hard to imagine, just as I sometimes find my own twin brother hard to imagine. I'm supposed to be doing a story on soldiers, what they do to keep from being frightened. But all I can think about is how Tim would chase me or I'd chase him, and we'd yell, "I'm gonna kill you," just like these brothers do, so alive in their bodies, just as Tim, who is so alive, will one day not be. Will it be me or him who first dies? But I came here to do a story on soldiers and how they keep watching out for death and manage to fight and die without going crazy. The boys squat down to look at ants climbing through corrugated bark, the wavering antennae tapping up and down the tree, reminding me of the soldier across the barracks, sitting still inside himself, listening to his nerves while his eyes peer out at something I can't see. When Achilles' immortal mother came to her grieving son, knowing he would soon die, and gave him his armor and kept the worms from the wounds of his dead friend Patroclus, she, a goddess, knew she wouldn't be allowed to keep those same worms from her son's body. I know I'm not his father. He's not my son, but he looks so young enough to be my son, sitting on his bunk, watching out for death, trying to fight and die without going crazy. He reaches for his rifle, breaks it down, dust cover, spring, bolt carrier with piston, wiping it all down with a rag and oil, cleaning it for the second time this hour, while shadows shifting through the pines bury him and the little boys and Tim and me, as I'm supposed to be doing a story in metaphorical, real life darkness. The next poem is Youth. It's the title, or it's I'm sorry, The King's Touch, and it's the title poem in the book. And the king that I have in mind is James of Scotland and England, and the King's Touch, because the king, it's a very ancient tradition, because the king is supposedly divinely anointed by God. All he has to do is reach out his hand and touch the sick, and he has the power to heal them. And the particular case with James is, of course, he held these grand meetings where, a lot of people would gather in the hope that they would be healed. But he hated them because he was notoriously squeamish and hated having to touch all those ulcers and sores and open wounds. And I had to have an MRI. And if you've never had an MRI, it's a very weird experience. It's like being passed through a kind of high-tech donut hole. And as you're passing through the donut hole, the machine is, creating this electromagnetic field, and it does that by, I guess, different kinds of currents. But anyway, after a while, you can bang, 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 bang. It's a little bit like having your head stuck in the speaker of, listening to the drummer of Megadeth or something like that. And so I had to have a MRI for a potential brain tumor. And I couldn't help but think, well, wouldn't it be nice if the king could reach out and touch me, heal me? The King's Touch after an MRI. Up through shifting blues to where the sun is coolly ignorant of where I lie on the sea bottom, lit by my own stormlight flickering, I hear the tech's voice wrapped in space dark, scuttling through black light. Please don't move, Mr. Sleigh. All around me, the room is stammering, iron smashing against iron, a robot drummer pounding out the Earth's magnetic field, slicing my brain into a geode's crystalline amethyst. Lying in my underwear, t-shirt, and holy socks, my head wedged to keep it still, I feel coming closer the king's hand. Poor, squeamish king, cursed by the power to cure, having to touch all us sufferers with our ugly, swollen glands. But why shouldn't the king's touch cure me? Caught like an astronaut against the ocean's curve, lit by the sun rising, I can see the tech back on Earth, reflected in the metal halo hovering above my skull. Spinning crazily as dials on an old dynamo, my body's beyond control, outside of me, staring up at my own neuter attachments. In front of me, the whole Earth shines in its neural blaze. And the tumor in my brain goes on its own spacewalk, free to drift where gravity takes it. My tumor that, like a mother, talks to me in dreams, asking, Tom, do you have your suitcase? Did you remember your razor and your toothbrush? Have you packed your shoes? This next poem is, I was, somehow I was on YouTube and I came across the most amazing video. There was a man out in the bush, and he was seated at a upright piano, And the he was playing Debussy, he was playing Clair de Lune, and he was playing Clair de Lune for this old female elephant. And I loved the female elephant seemed to be absolutely rapt with the music. And as he played, she shuffled her feet from side to side and she flapped her ears. And in some strange way seemed to be enjoying it. At least that's how it looked. And so I couldn't help but want to write this. And the poem also makes mention of what used to be, hopefully not so much anymore, but there was a whole generation of poets who ended up committing suicide. And poem sort of takes off on that and goes in a lot of different directions. Also, I mean, one of my favorite games when I was a kid was to play elephant. A man plays Debussy for a blind 84-year-old female elephant. I read today how, when a poet was going mad, hearing voices under his bed, his friend hid a speaking tube inside the wall and would whisper encouraging suggestions that the poet shouldn't kill himself, should wait till after breakfast when sun and sausages and eggs would put him in a more hopeful frame of mind. But my friend Liam killed himself, and Tree, his wife, said that was what he wanted. Nobody should pity her or him, which, by the same token, reminds me of the young Palestinian woman at a protest telling me just after she was tear gassed how she had no regrets. My voice coming out of nowhere since her eyes, stinging, were tearing up so badly she couldn't see. And yet today, when I read how a poet was going mad, hearing voices, there was another voice inside me interfering with the voice that said, "You're better off dead, you useless piece of shit." Only it wasn't a voice, but a melody, echoing from an out-of-tune piano that a man alone in the bush was playing for an elephant, an old blind female in her baggy hide and cataracted eyes, who had spent her life hauling logs, being beaten and abused, and now kept her distance from the herd, a loner, restless, or so her keepers at Elephant's World said. But listening to the music seemed to calm her, her homely flat feet shuffling side to side, her ears flapping to cool herself, but also to show pleasure, even joy. Yeah, that's what they claimed, joy. As the quiet melancholy, rising to near ecstasy of Clair de Lune, ascends to the high notes where elephant and pianist and listener all meld before descending gradually to more lush and subtly darker harmonies. Today, I read how a poet going mad. But you've heard all that before. When I was a boy, all we kids played elephant, swinging our arms like trunks as we shuffled head to tail or stampeded across the playground, driving off the lions and tigers and trampling our science teacher, Mr. Allen, his little glasses flying off his head as we joyously stomped him, trumpeting aloud. Why did we so hate him? And why can't I stop seeing that greenish pall of tear gas hanging heavy in the street? It's as if Invisible fingers keep playing on our neurons as man and elephant walk off into the bush. And just before the underbrush closes in, both come to a halt and stand facing one another. The man patting her trunk, curling around him to rest on his shoulder as he shuts his eyes and leans his forehead against hers. It's like each one's listening to what the other's thinking. Elephant thoughts of chains and things to eat, human ones of poets, sane or mad, until the music goes still and both elephant and human dissolve into sunlight, falling on the piano, all alone among the hills. And I'll finish with a last poem called Clearance for Matthew. And this poem takes off from a poem by Rimbaud. And various, I don't know, strange, memories work into it. I mean, when my mother turned 90, one of the things she wanted to do was to go on a dog sled ride. So I took her on one. That was quite an experience. And then also when I was in Lebanon, I was in a very, happened to be there when kind of some of the worst violence that had broken out in Lebanon since the 15-year civil war suddenly broke out. And there was a car bomb went off, many car bombs went off during that time, but this particular car bomb was in a very fashionable shopping district in Beirut. And I learned a lot about blast waves, and the blast wave ricocheted and hit the show window of an Armani store, and the glass shattered, but it also created a vacuum so that it sucked all of the Armani suits out into the street. And it was a very strange experience to see them all lying there. Clearance. For sale. 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan of the sniper turned musher to mutts pulling a dog sled at Snowmass. The animal in him touched by the essence of animal, staining the snow yellow, his scopes hidden under his cot in the bunkhouse. For sale. Continent under continent, the ocean shelving down, the blood of a whale pouring out of the gate of a flatbed truck and pattering like soft rain on the tarmac. A chainsaw hacks through blubber but stops short of the vertebrae set end to end like whiskey kegs. For sale. Ghosts lining up like girders made of core tin steel, the air ionized by their ectoplasmic flesh, so that the hair inside your nostrils turns electric when they pass. Scraps of voices, clanging resurrections, rusted hymns sung by deactivated RPGs, creaking hosannas of army surplus warehouses, bargain basement prices for the military slang of the 2nd Ass Crack Regiment, putting in for leave time at Fort Fumble. For sale. The otherworldly sergeant, lifting weights like an old-time strongman, a thick leather belt cinching his waist as if his strength or weakness could barely be contained. For sale. Yourself inside the blast wave, shattering the show window, its vacuum sucking all the suits into the street. Scorched linen sleeve of a 44 long, ready to wear for weddings, funerals, christenings. For sale. All voids, all empty spaces, all time torn off unused between what people say are life's greatest events and the unnoticed quiet of water polishing stone, wearing ever smoother, each atom always moving. Thanks very much, folks. Appreciate it.